Good evening and welcome to Recovery Out Loud Berks, our speaker series. My name is Yvonne. I'm a person in long-term recovery. Thank you for coming back and joining us. As we know, this is National Recovery Month, and this has been deemed by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration as a month-long event whereby we are educating and raising awareness and celebrating recovery from substance use disorders. 23 million Americans are in long-term recovery, and each of us have found a pathway that is unique to us and that we find freedom from the bondage of addiction. And tonight, we are happy to have another guest be willing to come and share their experience, strength, and hope. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, and so I'm going to be in the background asking you to, if you have any questions that you would like to ask our speaker at the end of his share, to please put them in the comment box, and then we will follow up with him once he has concluded his share. And so we're so grateful that he is with us, and I'm going to turn this now over to Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Yvonne. Thank you so much. And hey, everybody, and welcome and happy Recovery Month to everyone. My name is Tom McDermott, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And it really is amazing that I'm sitting here tonight and that we're all sitting here tonight, hopefully clean and sober. So I'm going to share a little bit about my journey to recovery and where it all began and how I got to this point today in my life. So I was born in April of 1968 and into a family, very loving family. Both of my parents are still alive. I'm grateful for that. Both of my parents are still married. They're in their 80s, and I have an older sister and a younger brother. And I was born in the Washington, D.C. area. And when I was about 4 years old, my family decided they didn't like that area. And so they decided to move to West Virginia. And still to this day, don't quite understand why they did that, but they moved. And, you know, when we moved to West Virginia, which was about an hour away, I just felt, even at age 4 or 5, I just felt like I didn't fit in. And that was kind of the start of my life, of just never feeling like I fit in and just kind of felt a little bit off. I need to back up a little bit and say that I'm actually first generation American. My mother is Canadian, my sister's Canadian, and my dad is from Scotland. And I truly believe that the disease of addiction and substance use disorder is hereditary. Addiction and alcoholism runs rampant on my father's side of the family. Both of his parents died of alcoholism. He had a brother that died of alcoholism, and it definitely skipped over him and landed in my lap. So, you know, as a young kid growing up, like I said, I just felt like I never fit in. You know, when all the boys wanted to go out and, play with trucks and army men and run in the woods, I wanted to play with my sister's Barbies. And, I kind of chuckle at that today, but back then, that's just what I wanted to do. I wasn't interested in going outside. I wanted to play with my sister's Barbies. And, I'm really fortunate that I have a family that they didn't care. My parents did not care. My mother was like, even my dad, you want to play with Barbies? Long as you're happy, we really don't care. At home, that was fine, but outside of home, it really wasn't fine back then. And, I remember going into elementary school and being teased and picked on and just didn't understand why I was being shoved on the playground and called a sissy and a faggot and a queer. And I didn't understand it. And, again, I struggled in school, but then I would be able to go home into my safe place. And, I was definitely teased, bullied, and picked on all through elementary school. And then in middle school, we were forced to play sports. We had to take gym class. And I remember being forced to play basketball, football, softball, all of these organized sports. And I just hated it. I was bad at it. And again, I got teased for that, and they used to pick teams. And even to this day, when I hear the words, we're going to pick teams, I get a knot in my stomach. And I was that kid that got picked last. I was picked last. And again, it really fed into that belief that I just wasn't good enough and that I didn't fit in. And when I went to high school, this is back in the early 1980s, I kind of felt that I was a little bit different. I knew that something was different, and I knew I liked hanging out with girls, but I was more attracted to boys. And so, I was in the early stages of coming out. However, that was the early 80s and the AIDS epidemic was hitting. And so, back then, really the only social media was the news and newspapers and magazines. And I remember seeing on the news these signs that, AIDS was for gay people and God does not like gay people. So here I am struggling with my sexuality, not feeling like I fit in. And these messages were coming across the television and in newspapers that, being gay was bad. So I kind of kept that hidden inside of me. And so went into high school. And when I was in the 11th grade, I was invited to go to a graduation party. And so I convinced my parents to let me go, said it was going to be a little sleepover with a few people, and went to this graduation party out on a farm. Remember, I was growing up in West Virginia, so there must have been about 300 people at this party, and we turned our keys in because I didn't want anybody driving. And that was the first time that I drank. And I drank alcoholically that very, very first time at age 17. And I remember when the alcohol hit my system for the first time in my life, I felt like I fit in. I felt a little bit smarter, a little bit funnier, and I just felt normal. Something clicked inside my head, and I'm like, this is how I want to feel. And so I drank, and everybody thought it was funny because I was a pretty goody goody and a good student. And I remember drinking a little too much, actually a lot too much. And I ended up getting very sick and I threw up, and they had a swimming pool and I threw up in the pool, and somebody pointed me over to the bushes. And somehow I landed on the kitchen floor and woke up the next morning and they were cooking breakfast, and I got that nauseous feeling and I felt like I was going to throw up, and I kind of lifted my head off the ground. And I said to myself, I can hardly wait to do this again. And that was the start of any opportunity I had to drink, I would drink. Any opportunity I had to smoke pot, I would smoke pot. Anything to take myself out of me so I could feel like I would fit in, I did it. And so, I graduated from high school, chose not to go to college, even though I was a pretty smart guy. I did not want to go to college. And again, my parents were fine with that. And they said, if you are not going to go to college, you need to work. And so I got a job in 1986. I got a job working at Dulles Airport in Virginia, outside of Washington, which is about an hour from West Virginia. Started off as an office clerk working for this company that was owned by the airlines. And I did really well. And I ended up moving out of my parents' house, got an apartment. However, I worked Monday through Friday, but on the weekends I would drink, and it was drinking alcoholically. When I started, I couldn't really stop. And it was, one weekend party into the next. And, at this point I was, in my early 20s, and I wasn't sure about my sexuality, but I was pretty sure that I was gay. And I remember this guy at work said to me, he goes, I'm going to take you to a bar that I think that you're going to like. And I was at a point in my life like, sure, let's go. And I remember driving into Southeast Washington, D.C., which was like, today's Southeast is beautiful. Back then, it was an absolute disaster. It was a really bad part of town. And I remember walking into this gay bar, and there were men everywhere, and there was drinking, there was a disco ball, and Madonna was playing in the background. And I remember looking around going, if this is what the gay life is all about, then I am in. Drinking, disco ball, Madonna. Like, I felt like this was that I had arrived, and this was it. And again, that was my transition, into what I perceived as the gay world. So I worked, did stuff with my family, and I drank and partied on the weekends. And it was starting to catch up with me. And I remember I was getting ready to go to work one day, and my mother called me and she said, we want you to stop by the house tonight. The family wants to have a little discussion with you. And so I said to myself, oh my gosh, they they figured out that I'm gay, they're going to call me out on it. And so I was nervous, and I stopped at the house that night, and, there's the family, and my mother said, we want to talk to you about something, we're concerned. And so I blurted out, I said, yeah, I know what it's all about, I'm gay. And my mother looked at me and she said, oh my God, we've known that forever. Even when you were playing with Barbies as a kid, we kind of knew you were a little off. She goes, we don't care about you being gay, and we're glad that you talked about it. What we're concerned about is your drinking. And it's starting to impact this family. And you are, showing up whenever we have a family gathering on the weekend, and you smell of alcohol. And we're concerned about that. And, my addict mind, my addict behaviors, which I had honed really well, kicked in, and I was able to manipulate my way out of that, and told them, everything's okay. You don't have to worry about it. I've got it under control. Everything will be fine. And I kind of walked away from that. And, that was what I did. I partied and I drank. And at that point, I started to go to the big nightclubs in Washington, and I started hanging out with a whole different group of people. And that's when drugs were introduced to what I did. So, I tried any type of speed I liked. So did cocaine, and I kind of like that balance. When you were starting to get a little drunk, do a little cocaine, it kind of leveled you off. And did ecstasy. If there was a big party, I would do ecstasy, and dance until, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And that was kind of my thing. And then I distinctly remember it like it was yesterday. The cocaine had kind of run out because a bunch of the dealers in Washington had been busted. And a friend of mine pulled me aside in the middle of this big dance club. And he said, there's a drug that's starting to really hit the Washington, D.C. area. Why don't you give it a try? And at that point in my addiction, if it was something to snort, I would snort it. If it was a pill, I would take it. Like, I really didn't care. Put it in front of me. I will drink it, swallow it, snort it, whatever. And he told me it was called crystal meth. And I did it for the first time. And I remember, like when I drank the first time, when crystal meth hit my system, something clicked in my head. And that feeling was the feeling that I had been looking for all along. I felt like I fit in. I had all this energy, and this feeling was the feeling that I wanted to have. And I knew that's what I wanted to do moving forward. I wanted to drink, do crystal meth, and that was it. And, I had been at this company for quite some time. I'd been promoted, and I was doing pretty good. And that was the outside. So I had things kind of pulled together on the outside, but internally I was an absolute disaster. And, when you are, at least for me, when you're drinking that much and doing drugs, you really don't care enough about yourself. And to be completely transparent, I was quite promiscuous, in those days. I was coming into my sexuality. And so I just didn't care enough about myself, and so I was quite promiscuous. And so this was the early 90s, and so I would go and see a doctor a couple of times a year, and I would get tested for HIV a few times a year. And I remember in February of 1991, I had been tested, and the doctor's office called me and said, "We want to see you. The doctor wants to see you." And I knew what that meant. And I called my mother, she went with me, and the doctor told me, you're HIV positive, you've contracted HIV. And, in 1991, it was still a death sentence. They had some new medications, but they were really hard on the body. And the doctor's talking, my mother's crying, and the doctor's talking, I don't even remember what he was saying, but all I knew in my head was, you're going to die, who cares? And let's just use until the wheels come off the wagon. And that's exactly what I did. I partied as much as I possibly could, and I did as much meth as I possibly could. And it was really starting to impact my personal life, my family life. My parents knew that there was something. I'd lost a lot of weight. And it was starting to impact work, but I did that from 1991 right up until 1995. And in February of 1995, 4 years after I tested positive for HIV, I remember leaving work, and I was really tired because I was coming off of like a 3-day crystal meth run, and I didn't have any more, and it was dark, and I was getting ready to drive home, and I was absolutely exhausted. I could barely even function, and got behind the wheel of the car, and about halfway home, I felt myself starting to fall asleep. And so, not the brightest move, I took my seatbelt off to get my cigarettes. I smoked at the time. And I remember getting a cigarette, and that's the last thing I remember. I completely fell asleep, sideswiped the truck, went down into a ditch, and it took them 3.5 hours to get me out of the car. And the miracle to that, and I'm sure many people have miracles in their story of how God kind of looked out for you when I didn't even realize it. The only thing that saved me was the airbag that was in that car. And it just so happened I was in a rental car because my car was in the body shop, and my car didn't have an airbag. This is when airbags were just getting started. The only thing that saved my life was the airbag. Ended up in the hospital, broken leg, messed up knee, in the hospital for 3 weeks. And I remember detoxing off of meth, and people didn't know what meth was, back in 1995 in the hospital in Virginia. I detoxed, and it was awful, and I was on edge and angry and pissed off. And I remember taking a tray of food and throwing it across the room. And I remember saying to myself, I will never use crystal meth again. That was the commitment I made to myself. However, I didn't know what recovery was. I didn't know what 12-step fellowship was. This was just sheer will. And I left the hospital. I went home. My parents took care of me, and it was almost a month and a half before I went back to work. And I went back to work, and there was a big fanfare. Welcome back, Tom. We're so glad you're back. And and I had put on weight. I was healthy again. And I went right back to the same group of people again. I went right back and hanging out with the same people. And, I believe for me, the disease of addiction is progressive. I hadn't used in almost 3 months, and went to the clubs and said, I'm only going to drink. I'm not going to do meth, and that did not last long at all. And before I knew it, I was using meth again. And this time, though, I needed so much more to put me in that place that I felt I needed to be in order for that click to go off in my head. And by this point, my family knew that I was using again, and they were upset. And before I knew it, I did something that I swore that I would never do. Is I ended up injecting crystal meth. So I used a needle, and I remember when I did it, I didn't want to do it, promised I would never do it, and I did it. And I remember when it hit my system, I said, 2 things. Number one, I'm screwed because there's no turning back. And number 2, that this is the only way that I want to do it. And after that, it was just a downward spiral. And, I remember it was like Mother's Day, and I was an absolute disaster. And I called home to say, I'm not going to be able to make it. And I was trying to figure out what excuse to use. My mother said, let me stop you. She said, the family has decided that we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. We know you're using, it's killing us. So don't call us. Don't stop by the house. Don't call your brother or sister. Don't bother any of us. However, if you want help, we will be here to help you. And I told my mother to go F herself. I told the whole family to go F themselves. I hung up the phone, and I went on a run. And, a few weeks after that, my boss called me into his office, and he said, and I was a wreck. I mean, I was using at work, and it was just a disaster. And my boss said, Tom, he goes, I don't know what's going on with you, but it's bad. It's really bad. And I can't cover for you anymore. You're calling off. I don't know what to do. And I kind of had this moment where I broke down, and I told him, I said, look, I'm shooting crystal meth on a daily basis. I'm a disaster. I need help. So he didn't know what to do. And he said, let me call down to human resources, go downstairs. I went downstairs, and for a company that had been around for a long time, they didn't know what to do with somebody that was reaching out for help. And so, the HR person said, here's the phone number for your insurance for substance use. Give them a call, take a lunch. I went to a parking lot, did a whole bunch of meth, called them. This was on a Tuesday. And they set me up with outpatient. Today, now that I work in the field, I know that if somebody says you're injecting crystal meth, you don't set them up for outpatient. But they did. I had an appointment on a Friday. I went back into work and told human resources, I said, look, I've got an outpatient appointment on Friday. I'll have it all pulled together. I've got this. It's going to be fine. Once again, I manipulated the crap out of them, and they were like, Tom, that's great. Go to your appointment, and why don't you take the rest of the week off work? And you need to be back into work the following Monday. And if you don't come to work, you're fired. Sign this piece of paper. And so I signed that piece of paper and I left work on a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't have an appointment until Friday. I went home, packed up an overnight bag, and I drove to DC, and I used Wednesday, Thursday, showed up 2 hours late for my appointment, blew through the appointment. I was an absolute train wreck. People in the outpatient were kind of looking at me like, what planet is he from? And left there and called my mother to say, hey, just want to let you know, I went to an appointment. And she said, well, that really isn't good enough. Thanks for letting us know, but that's really not good enough. That's not the help that we were hoping you were, looking for, and hung up the phone. And I went out that weekend and partied all the way through the weekend, and I didn't show up for work. I did not show up for work. And I remember somehow I ended up in Frederick, Maryland at a friend's house in this apartment. And I called into my phone machine, because back then there weren't cell phones. So I called to get my messages. And I had like 5 messages from a friend of mine saying, please call me, please call me. And I called him. And he's like, dude, they fired you. Like, they fired you. The company has fired you. Nobody knows where you are. We're scared. And like, when I hung up the phone with him, I had this moment of clarity. Even as high as I was, everything was focused. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I lose my job, I'm going to lose my health insurance. I'm going to lose all this stuff. And like, I panicked. And so I called into work the next morning, and somebody at the reception desk must have had a note to transfer me to the vice president of the company. His name was Dan Mingledorf. And Dan picked up the phone and he said, wow, McDermott, you have really, really effed this up. And I said, Dan, I have. And, if I lose my job, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my house, my car. I just can't lose this job. And I said, when I get off the phone with you, I'm just going to kill myself. And he said, oh my gosh, McDermott, you are such a drama queen. He said, I want you to listen to me, and I want you to listen to me closely. He said, you've got 48 hours to check yourself into rehab. I don't give a damn where you go, how you get there. You've got 30 days. I will cover for you. I'm going to get a lot of trouble for this, but I'm going to do it. He said, get the help. And I hung up the phone. And I always get choked up at this part when I tell my story. I called my mother and I said, I'm ready. I need help. Please, I need help. She said, where are you at? I said, I'm in Frederick. She said, I will meet you at your townhouse. And I drove. I was about 2 hours late getting there because I'd been up for days on end. And when I pulled up, I didn't see her car. I'm like, well, where the hell is she at? Where's my mother? And so as I'm pulling into my parking space, my mother came out of nowhere. It was like an episode of Cops. And she like drove across, I kid you not, 3 people's lawns, blocked my car in. And she's about 5 foot. And she jumped out of the car and she said, give me your keys, get in that house. We're playing by my rules. And I was like, whoa, okay, Mom, do you want to frisk me or anything? And she took me inside, and she was able to find a sober living program in Winchester, Virginia called Edge Hill. They had just been open a few months. It was run by people in recovery. And it was really, it was kind of basic, but I needed to get somewhere quick. And she said, let's go. I got a bed for you. So I packed a bag and we were driving to Winchester. And I remember my mother saying to me, how do you feel about going into treatment? And I said, I'm absolutely terrified. And she said, what are you scared about? I said, I'm scared about being teased and picked on and seeing. And this is what I didn't realize. I didn't realize that all of that crap from my past, not being sure if I'm gay, I think I'm gay, the messages from during the AIDS epidemic and being bullied and teased and picked on, all of that crap had bubbled to the surface because for a decade I had been medicating. It was all at the surface and I didn't know what to do with it. And I was scared. I was fearful that people were going to call me names. And my mom said, I hope that doesn't happen. Let's check you in. They checked me in and I was crying. My mom was crying. And my mother, she's a little feisty like me, she looked at the director and she said, I want you to please give me the book and the manual that's going to keep him sober. So when he leaves here, I'll be able to keep him sober. And I laugh because it's funny. The director looked at my mother and said, Mrs. McDermott, we're going to take really good care of your son, but there's a wonderful program for you called Al-Anon. And they gave her a meeting list and she actually went to a meeting that night. And, for the first few years of my recovery, my mother went to Al-Anon. So I checked in terrified, went to bed. I hadn't slept in a week. They woke me up and at 5:30 in the morning. And before I knew it, at 7 o'clock, I was sitting in the treatment center. They had a meeting. People from the outside came in at the early bird meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember sitting there looking around the room going, how in the hell did I get here? And people were talking about God. And I looked at the wall, there's the 12 steps. And I just didn't get it. And I was just like, I am not buying into any of this crap whatsoever. And however, I listened. I listened, didn't have a choice. My job was on the line. I went into treatment to save my job. And the way that program worked is we went to 3 meetings a day. We did a morning group. We did an afternoon big book study, which I absolutely despised. And we would do, like a closing at the end of the day to kind of check in. It was really basic and simple, but the basics were, we went to AA and NA. That's what we did. And the one thing they said to us over and over was, if you want to stay sober, you got to go to meetings, you got to get a sponsor, and you got to work the steps. And so, I was like, about 2 weeks in, I'm like, okay, I'm going to meetings. I don't know anything about these steps, but I better get a sponsor. And so there was this guy who would come and volunteer, and I saw him at meetings and he was openly gay. And I'm like, well, I better get a gay sponsor because I don't think there's any other gay people for a 30-mile radius here in Winchester, Virginia. So I asked him, his name was Bill. I said, Bill, I would like for you to be my sponsor. And he looked at me and he said, I really don't want to sponsor you. And, I still had a bit of an ego. And I was like, what do you mean you don't want to sponsor me? Like, don't you know who I am? And I was like, Bill, why don't you want to sponsor me? And he said, well, I'm going to be honest with you. You're a little bit of I won't say it because we're on Facebook Live, a little bit of an a-hole. And I was like, why are you calling me out like that? And he goes, look, I only sponsor people that are serious. He goes, I see you joking around in the big book studies. I see you go out to smoke at meetings. You don't come back in again. He goes, I don't think you're serious. So I said to him, I said, if you give me a chance, I'd really like you to be my sponsor. And he said, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. And I want you to answer it. And I said, all right, sure, fire away. And he goes, what are you willing to do today for your recovery? I'm like, what am I willing to do for my recovery? And I'm thinking, and he interrupted me and he's like, you know what, you're taking too long. He said, the answer is anything. And he said, I want you to ask yourself that question every day. What are you willing to do for your recovery? And if the answer is anything, then you're going to be okay. And so I said, all right, I'm willing. And I said to him, and I always like to broker. I'm a good addict. I want to broker a deal. So I said to him, I will do whatever you say for 1 year. And if my life doesn't get better, I'm going to get high. And he said, I can work with those odds. He said, but remember, you're going to do whatever I say. And I said, gotcha. So I left treatment. It was August of 1995. August 5th, 1995 is when I walked into treatment, which is actually my sobriety date, August 5th, 1995. In October of 1995, I'd already left treatment. My sponsor said to me, he goes, we are going to go to an HIV retreat. And I looked at him and I told him to go F himself. I'm like, I'm not going to an HIV retreat because again, that was something in my life I'd never looked at before. I'd never looked at my HIV status at all. I'm like, here I'm going to meetings and I'm doing step work. And he goes, remember, 1 year commitment, anything I say, we're going to an HIV retreat. I said, fine, let's go. So in October 1995, my sponsor and I drove to Wernersville. Oof, I still get choked up to this day. October 1995, went to an HIV retreat in Wernersville, Pennsylvania, which happens to be at Karen, and never heard of Karen before. My sponsor had heard of these retreats, and so we went. And and I was skeptical. I'm like, well, I don't want to talk about my feelings and my HIV. And I remember sitting on the porch of the villa at the top of the hill. Back then, that's where they had these retreats. And this tall, gray-haired gentleman came up and kind of barked at me, and he was like, "Hey, you, what's your name?" And I kind of looked up at him, and I said, "My name's Tom. Who the hell are you?" And he said, "My name's Father Bill." And I was like, Father Bill, Catholic priest, organized religion, not so much. And I told him to go jump off a cliff and stay away from me. And he said, "You know what, son, that's fine. I just ask that you go through this weekend with an open mind." And something happened that weekend that I wasn't planning to have happening. And there was a shift in my recovery. There was a shift in my spirituality that I didn't see. And people from all over were coming back to this place in Pennsylvania to see this crazy priest by the name of Father Bill, to these retreats. And, remember, this is 1995. People were still dying. And there were people in the final stages of AIDS coming back to this place to see Father Bill, and they were all sober. Every single person was sober. And I'm like, it blew my mind. And I went through that weekend. And on Sunday, we had the chapel service, which I really wasn't thrilled about going. And my sponsor sat with me and we listened. And Father Bill walked in. When he walked in and he said, "Nobody gets beat up in my church." He goes, "I will take all the people that nobody else wants." And he said, "If you're gay, I'll accept you. If you have AIDS, I'll accept you." He goes, "You're an addict, alcoholic, divorced, whatever, I'll take you." And it truly altered my thinking. I mean, I could feel a shift, and I left that weekend just feeling great. And Father Bill came up to me at the end of that weekend to kind of say, "So, son, what did you think?" And I said, Thank you for an amazing weekend." And he said, "Son, I just want to say one thing to you." And I was like, "What's that?" And he said, "Don't ever let another human being tell you what God thinks of you." 25 years later, that still resonates in my head, that nobody else they can say what they want to say, but nobody else can tell me what God thinks of me. And that was the start of the spiritual part of my program. And that was my journey after that. And as bad as things got, I knew that there was a retreat a couple of months away. So I started coming to these retreats. I celebrated a year, and my life started to get a little bit better, but enough for me to continue to do the work. And I started coming to these retreats year after year. So 3 or 4 times a year, I would come to Pennsylvania to these retreats. And and my sponsor suggested that I get into therapy, and I did. I didn't realize that that I had to do internal work on myself. I had to do that core work, get in touch with that wounded kid that was pushed down on the playground, and make peace with him, and make peace with the kid that found out that he was HIV positive before there were any medications, to make peace with all that residual crap. And that was the journey of my program, was going to meetings, working the 12 steps, and then also doing the other core work. All together is what kept me on the track of recovery. And, this is where my story kind of takes a different direction, that, by this time I had a few years sobriety. I was really doing great with my job with the airlines, was promoted, doing really well. And Father Bill and I became really, really good friends. And, somewhere along the lines, Father Bill said to me at one of these retreats, he goes, "I want you to come and work here." And I'm like, no thanks. I've got a big title, I'm making a lot of money, and I'd moved to Washington, D.C. I'm like, I'm really not interested, Father Bill. And, each retreat he would say, "I want you to come and work here." And I would say, thanks, but no thanks. I'm really not interested. And, in August of 2003, I rolled into one of these retreats, and right away the old man started, "God told me to tell you that you're supposed to work here." And I'm like, "Well, you can tell God that I'm not interested." But just to kind of get him off my back, I said, "Father Bill, there's 2 things holding me back right now. I'm in a relationship, which I've been in for 2 years, and I was just put on a big project of work." And I said to him, if those 2 things were not in my way, I'll come work at Karen. And so he said, I'm going to pray for you. And I said, knock yourself out and let me know how it goes. So I left that retreat, went home. About a month later, my 2-year relationship ended, which was was not on the books to happen. Found out that he had met somebody else. I didn't know it. Anyway, the relationship ended. And in January of 2004, they pulled the plug on the project. I got pulled into my boss's office and they pulled the plug. And they said, we're going to move you somewhere else. Don't worry. And so I'm like, okay, scratched my head, went home that night. And I called Father Bill and I said, I want you to do me a big favor. And he said, what's that? I said, please don't ever pray for me again. And that's like our inside joke. And so in February of 2004, I came to Pennsylvania and interviewed for an entry-level position as a CA, counselor assistant, a tech, that would work with patients on the floor. And they offered me a job. And I left my job with the airlines. I left my job of 17 years, took a 70% pay cut, sold my condo, paid off debt, and set up shop here in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and started working at Karen in March of 2004. And it was the best thing that I ever did. And I know my higher power has a sense of humor because the only opening they had was working with the adolescents. And talk about fear, being around these adolescent boys that reminded me of the kids that used to, kick my ass back in high school. It was healing for me. It was. And, some of the kids called me, one of them called me a fag. And I'm like, okay, I've been called that my whole life. You're going to have to come up with something better than that. However, that's not okay while you're in treatment here. And actually, the kid ended up making amends. And it was an opportunity for me to do more work. And, that's where I knew that I was supposed to be, so I've been at Karen now for 16 years, and some of the gifts of sobriety, working at Karen, I was able to go back to school again. I never wanted to go to school. Coming to work here enabled me to go back to school. Graduated from school. I have a bachelor's degree now, and I've done pretty well at Karen and became really good friends with Father Bill. Father Bill ended up becoming one of my dearest friends, and he lived on campus. Father Bill lived on campus, and I would get to see him at the beginning of my day. And I would get to see Father Bill at the end of my day. And we had this bond and friendship that words can't describe it. And, I believe people come into your life for a reason. And, Father Bill passed away last year. They just had a celebration for him a few weeks ago. And, the man will always be with me. But I am the person I am today because of the work that I've done. And, I still ask myself that question every single day. What are you willing to do today for your recovery? And I had to lean into my program. I tell that to people, when things happen and my recovery is tested, I have to lean into my recovery and get back to the basics of what do I need to do. And, even as pulled together, as I seem to be, my core stuff still comes to the surface. I'm grateful that I'm on a medication today for my HIV. I'm undetectable. I'm healthier than I've ever been before. But sometimes there's core beliefs that I used to think will still pop up into my head. I'm not good enough. You don't fit in. All of those negative messages. But today, through my recovery and the work I've done, I'm able to turn those messages around. My addiction is powerful. It's sitting there waiting for an opportunity. This pandemic definitely tested my recovery as well as many other people. Again, I had to lean into my recovery program. But getting back to the basics, for me, I got to keep it really simple. What do I need to do today to stay sober? And what am I willing to do today for my recovery? And the answer is anything. If that means getting back into therapy, I'll get back into therapy. If it's reaching out when I don't want to reach out, then I'm going to do that. I got a phone call today from somebody I've known a long time that I helped to get into treatment at another facility. When he called me today, and I was like, oh man, I really don't feel like taking this call. I'm busy. I've got things to do. And I'm glad I took it because he was struggling. He was at a turning point where he wanted to leave treatment. He wanted to get high. And in that moment, there were no other options. And, I listened. And all I said was that just get through the rest of today, and maybe you'll feel better tomorrow. Let's just kind of talk through what you're going through. And I spent, 25 minutes on the phone with this kid. And at the end of it, he said, you know what? I'm going to stay, and I feel so much better. And, I'm able to do that just as other people have done that for me. When bad things happen and things go down, I know how to pick up a phone and, and ask for help. And again, lean into my recovery program. Today, the world of recovery has grown, and there's so many different avenues to stay sober. There's so many different types of 12-step meetings, non-12-step meetings, recovery groups. It's such a vast abundance of opportunities to stay sober. And I like to tell people, whatever you need to do to not get drunk or high, then do it. There's no set guideline on what recovery looks like for you. I know what works for me. I know I wouldn't be here. Last month I was humble enough to celebrate 25 years of continuous sobriety. People ask me how I did it. I said, you know what? Willingness to do the next right thing is what keeps me sober today. And, and for that, I'm grateful. I still go to meetings today. I do step work when I feel like I need to do step work. I bounce in and out of, therapy when I need to bounce in and out of therapy. And I talk about the crap that bothers me. I'm in an amazing relationship, over 4 years now with a partner. That's a gift of sobriety. I would never be able to have that gift. And what's really amazing is that my partner, who when we started dating, he was not in recovery. About a little over a year ago, he decided on his own, not by me pushing or anything, decided to give recovery a try. And he now is in recovery. He goes to therapy as well. All because he's seen what works for me, which that could be a little scary if you try to follow my path. But, and that has allowed our relationship to blossom into what it is today. And, and I go back to circle back of what all this has given me, which is gifts. Remember saying to my first sponsor that if my life doesn't get better after a year, I'm going to get high. I'm so glad that my life got a little bit better after that first year. Today, 25 years later, I can't describe the life that I have today. I'm happy, joyous, and free. I know that's kind of cliche, but it really is. And, recovery, my version of recovery has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. I'm 52 years old today. I work in the field. I work for an amazing organization. I work with other amazing organizations, and it all comes down, we're all in this recovery boat together, and, and we all just have to help each other out. And, your journey might be different than my journey. As long as we're on the path of recovery together, doesn't make any difference how we got here. So, I've talked for quite a bit of time. I want to leave a little bit of time for question and answers. So with that, I'll keep coming back. Thank you for letting me share. And I'm really grateful that all of you are here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So first of all, congratulations. Congratulations on 25 years of long-term sobriety. And what I heard from your journey was that it was not an easy path. And I think, oftentimes in our own uniqueness, we think that we're the only ones that go through that struggle. And what I heard you say is, you're working, you continue, even 25 years later, you continue to do the work. And I think that's a message really that should also be resonated through our journeys, is that there's no resting on our laurels. If we are in our willingness to do anything to stay sober, we have to continue to do the work. So in terms of just the question, I don't see any questions from Jennifer, but I do have a couple questions for you, because I'm just really curious in terms of, you talked about your higher power. And I just, oftentimes when I'm around folks or at meetings and we talk about higher power, and sometimes there are folks that they don't go to meetings because of that, right? because of that thing, we will put it in air quotes, that they have with a higher power. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And what work did you put in for your own self to really just kind of become okay with a higher power? And I'm just curious is to know what I always like to know from folks. How did you resolve your which can be kind of considered an inner conflict, but how did you resolve that for yourself?
Yeah, so I was I was raised Catholic, and so I was raised Catholic, so no disrespect to the Catholic Church, organized religion. I believe everybody has the right to believe how they want. However, the Catholic Church doesn't, if you're not this, you're this. If you're not this, you're this. So I really, I thought higher power, God, the spiritual part of the program was about organized religion. And so again, my first sponsor really helped me, and he said, no, dude, he said, all you're seeing is the word God. You got to read the rest, as we understood him or whatever. And so my sponsor said, you just got to pray to something. So pick something to pray. This is an early recovery. He said, pick something to pray to, and it just can't be you. And so it's kind of funny, I said that I used to like to play with Barbie. So in the beginning, I used to pray to Barbie. Barbie was my higher power. I know that sounds crazy, but like I would pray, to Barbie. And so, after a while, my sponsor said, so you might want to change the name of that, because it sounds a little weird, as you, get on your knees and pray to Barbie. But, that's what worked for me. And I keep it really, really simple. I try not to read between the lines too much. It's something bigger than me that kind of helps me through. And, I don't pray for certain things. I just pray for strength and guidance. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. When you talk about your, I appreciate your candor. First of all, let me share that with you. And just you come across as very compassionate and very sincere and authentic in your pathway. And when you talk about just doing some of that core work and going back to therapy, have you found, sometimes we, in recovery, folks hit benchmarks. So, okay, I've gone to 30-day treatment. I don't need to do that anymore. Or I've gone to, see my therapist and was in therapy for 6 months. I don't need to do that anymore. Can you just kind of comment about that when we talk about our willingness and, it sounds like you continue to be open to therapy, and is there any thing that you can kind of comment on to let folks know that there's nothing? It doesn't mean that it's a setback, but actually it actually means it's the opposite, that there is a strength in you that sees the need to further your own spiritual and emotional growth. What do you say to that?
So there's a line from one of my favorite songs by Elton John, "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me." And there's a line that says, the more I search myself, there's always someone else I see, And so as I go on this path of recovery, life happens, and certain situations and things come up and it might even catch you off guard, especially when you're working in the field, that out of nowhere, I'm so in tune with myself, I can tell when something's a little off. And look, my addiction will pop out in other avenues. And for me, I can get sucked into the world of Amazon, sucked into the world of eBay, and start doing the shopping. When I start seeing those behaviors kind of spiral and get out of control, I have to pause and go, okay, what's going on here? This isn't about the next best thing that I think I need to have. This is about, there's something going on internally. Might not be picking up meth or alcohol, but I'm using other things to take myself out of me. And so it's an opportunity to grow, because we never stop growing as people in long-term sobriety. It's an ongoing evolution.
And how do you work on being gentle with yourself through that? Just in terms of having those nuances of observations for yourself, your level of awareness is very keen. And then, how do you continue to be gentle with yourself so that you're not beating yourself up through that process? You know what I mean? Like sometimes folks can say, well, oh my gosh, you're 10 years sober, you should know better than that, right? And so how do you work on saying, I'm growing. And as a gentle grower, it's okay. Give yourself permission to be okay with your journey.
Yeah, I've learned to be comfortable in my own skin. And that's taken quite a bit of time. I'm my own worst critic. And so, about a year and a half ago, I moved into a new position at Karen. So I do outreach now. Previously, I'd been in my position for a long time. I was very comfortable in it. I knew what I was doing, and I went into this role. And it was like all those voices were in my head. You're not good enough, and you're not going to succeed. You're going to fail. And and I have to, when those messages are rattling around in my head, I have to pause and go, wow, where is this core belief coming from? And for me, it goes back to the childhood crap. It really does. Most roads lead back to that kid that never fit in, and it's my addiction that's giving me those those messages. I went through a 5.5-day program at about 2.5 years sober that really opened my heart and allowed me to really do that work around that little kid. So, one of the things they told me was, you got to take care of that little kid that got pushed around on the playground. You got to keep him with you. And because when you're not taking care of you, you're not taking care of him. So just keep that in mind,
Yeah. There is it's not a question, but a comment. So you may want to respond to it, Tom. And this is from Lee Cruz. He said, Tom, I myself find more peace within myself through my vulnerability of being open with my life to its fullest. Do you think it hinders people not to allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to be totally open about their life with all their hurts and pains from the past? I just know it works for me, but just asking in general.
Yeah, today with a little bit of recovery and a little bit of therapy, I'm good with me. Well, let's just say right here in this moment, right now, I'm good with me. And, I don't have any secrets, and I kind of gauge when I need to be completely open. Like, I'm not going to be standing in the line at the grocery store and say, hi, my name's Tom, I'm HIV positive, but I'm a crystal meth addict that used to, use needles. Like, that's a little too much. But, but when opportunity arises, like, I have nothing to hide. And for me, when I don't want to be completely open, it comes from shame. Shame will keep me, again, will disconnect me from higher power, So I'm not ashamed of anything I've done in my addiction. I'm not shameful that I contracted HIV. Like, it was part of my journey. And so when, I think some people, allows shame to kind of keep them hidden, and it doesn't allow you to, to be open. So.
And those are those, can you talk a little bit about triggers as well? Because you had mentioned about your childhood, and so, we're talking about using buzzwords. And so those things can be, if we're not willing to acknowledge that they exist. And so sometimes subconsciously we're saying, well, that was, you hear people say, well, that was in the past. Why are you still worried and dealing about that? But those are unsurmountable triggers that occur for folks that really keep them entrenched in that that place that doesn't allow them to even begin to grow, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting about triggers is, like, I can make a list of things that trigger me, and most of the time they don't. What I have to watch for me is that I'll get triggered and it'll catch me off guard. Like, it'll absolutely come out of nowhere. Like, I can hear somebody, say the word faggot, and it's like, okay, whatever. And then depending upon what space I'm in, if I hear it, it can really knock me off my square. It really can. Today, though, I have a voice. So, like, I don't allow that word to be said in my presence, even if it's people I don't know. And that's taking a risk. But, like, I'm the point, like, one thing I learned how to do as a kid was run really fast, and I can run really fast today too. So, if I hear somebody use that word, I very politely say, you know what, that's a hurtful word, please don't say. And they might tell me to go F myself, whatever, that's fine. But at least, like today I have a voice, like I don't want to hear that word. And there's other words too, that are disparaging words, towards other people's religion, towards their race. There's certain words that are just not okay. And if I hear them, I'll very politely ask people, please don't use those words around me. And then I run really fast.
What's your relationship like with your family today? Because you talked about your family, and I'm just curious, what's your relationship like with family today?
I have an amazing relationship. My dad is 87 years old. My mother's 80, I think she's 83 years old, and they still live together. They're able to take care of each other.
Awesome.
My younger brother lives near them, and my sister lives out west, and we are a very, very close family. I just went and visited them about a month ago, and so a very, very close family. And we were a close family before, but like me moving into recovery, and even my mom, look, my mom's in her 80s, she doesn't do Al-Anon as much anymore, but in the beginning she did a lot of Al-Anon. And so I believe when recovery enters a family, everyone is touched by it. So it's definitely deepened and made our family even more close.
And your sister?
My sister, she lives out in Salt Lake City. Yeah, she's amazing. So she's my biggest cheerleader. She absolutely, she's proud of me, and my whole family is. They really are.
That is awesome. And then do you know what your turning point was in terms of? I know you talked about work, and they were, the gentleman had said you got 48 hours to get into treatment, and you had been offered that before. And I guess I'm just using it as I'm hearing your story, that was told to you before, and you kind of then was just like, oh, whatever. And I'm just always curious for folks, like, do you know what that one turning point was? Because at some point in time, I think for all of us, there's that moment of clarity that says, you know what, if you don't do something right here, right now, today, it's over.
When my friend told me that they had fired me, that would be, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Like I said before, I was in Frederick, Maryland. It was in the middle of the night. I was in a dark apartment by myself. There was a candle. There were syringes everywhere. And when he told me I had lost my job, it was like everything. Like, I wouldn't say that I was sober, but my mind was clear, and it was complete. It was like, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is what my life has become. And I remember that feeling of hopelessness and despair and hurt like it was yesterday. And 25 years later, even I have never had that same feeling again. I've never felt that, even with loss and relationships and bad things. I've never had that feeling again. And when I ever get like, oh, I think I might want to get high, or that thought pops in, I can tap into that feeling, and I don't want to ever feel that way again. That was truly the turning point.
With all you've been through, and I think about, as you were sharing your story, I think about our young generation today. And I think about that because I was emailing a mom who has a college student that's struggling with gambling. And so sometimes it's hard to tap into those young people. And I know you've worked with them. Is there anything that you can share with family members who might have a young person who is in the midst of an active addiction, to just kind of inspire some hope?
Yeah, when I was out running around and nobody knew where I was, my mother was calling around trying to find me, and somebody said to her, you know what, Mrs. McDermott, you got to hold on to hope. You got to hold on to hope, and when he's ready, be there for him, and do whatever it takes to get him help. And so, the world today, I'm going to sound like an old man. It's a whole different world today with social media and access to cell phone and access to, I could jump on my phone and have crystal meth delivered to my front door in like 2 minutes, which is frightening. If a family member has a loved one that's struggling, then do whatever you need to do to get them the help that they need. Even if they don't want it, get them the help that they need, because we're living in a whole different world today, and especially now in the midst of the pandemic. And as much as I don't want to say it, I think it's going to get a little worse before it gets a little bit better. And I think we're going to see a lot of people struggle. So
yeah. And kudos to your mom. You talk to her again and you tell her bravo for her traveling across those lawns to make sure that you were getting the help that you need. And what a
In a
beautiful
red Pontiac Sunbird, right?
That's just, I so appreciated your story this evening, and it just lightened my heart because I just think that you are a beacon of hope. You are talking the talk and walking the walk, and that's just awesome. And thank you for mentioning Father Bill. As you were sharing that, I'm just remembering just the hugs that he gave and the kind words and the kind eyes and just, I've always said in my story that I believe that there are angels that walk this earth and they are in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe that Father Bill is watching over us, and particularly for you, Tom, just saying how proud he is and just bravo. So I want to just thank you again for all who you are and what you bring to the world of recovery. And the hope and the inspiration has touched lives tonight, and you just need to know that. So thank you. And as we kind of sign off, just want to remind folks that we are celebrating National Recovery Month all month long. And so we'll be back here on Thursday evening at 6 o'clock from 6 to 7. And we're going to hear from a young man by the name of Robert as he talks about his journey and what it was like for him and what his life is now today as a result of recovery. And also want to invite people to visit our Berks website at berksrise.org. And if you have a story of recovery that you want to share with us in the way of a paragraph of what recovery means to you or a 30-second video, please feel free to share that with us as we go forward and let people know that Berks County is alive and well with people in long-term recovery. So my name is Yvonne. On behalf of the Berks Rise Center, we thank you. We offer you blessings this evening. Be well and have peace.